The sound of shattering glass echoed to the two-bedroom apartment in Suralere, Lagos, as Bisola ducked instinctively. The drinking glass that Cunnel had thrown sailed past her head and exploded against the kitchen wall, spraying shards across the tiles she'd mopped just hours earlier. "You burned the soup." Cunnel's voice filled their small living space, his face twisted with rage. "You know I hate burned food. What kind of wife are you?" Bisola pressed herself against the refrigerator, her heart pounding. The soup wasn't even burned. She'd tasted it herself before serving. But contradicting Cunnel would only make things worse. It always made things worse. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words automatic after 4 years of this dance. "I'll make another one." "Sorry? Sorry." He moved closer, and she could smell the beer on his breath. He'd stopped at a bar after work again, which meant tonight would be especially bad. "You're always sorry, but you never change." Bisola was 31 years old, though she looked older now. The bright-eyed pharmacy technician who'd married Cunnel at 27 had slowly disappeared, replaced by this frightened woman who measured her words and walked on eggshells in her own home. Cunnel was 35, a mechanic who ran a small auto repair shop in Yaba. To his customers and friends, he was charming and hardworking. To Bisola, he was a monster who emerged whenever they were alone. "Please, Cunnel, the neighbors will hear," Bisola said, glancing nervously at the thin walls of their apartment building. "Let them hear." He grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to leave marks. Maybe they should know what it's like living with a useless wife. Bisola bit back a cry of pain. Their neighbor, Mama Ngozi, an elderly woman who lived next door, had heard the shouting before. She'd seen Bisola's bruises at the market. Once, she'd even asked gently, "My daughter, is everything well at home?" But what could Bisola say? What could anyone do? "I worked 12 hours a day at that shop." Cunnel continued, his grip tightening. "Breaking my back to provide for you, and this is what I come home to? Burned food and a wife who can't do anything right." The irony wasn't lost on Bisola. She also worked 8 hours a day at a pharmacy in Acadia, then came home to cook, clean, and tried desperately to anticipate Cunnel's moods. Her entire salary went into their joint account that only Cunnel could access. She had no money of her own, no freedom, no escape. "Let go," she said quietly. "You're hurting me." His response was a backhand across her face that sent her stumbling against the kitchen counter. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth as her teeth cut her lower lip. "That's for talking back," he said coldly. Bisola touched her lip, feeling it already swelling. Tomorrow at work, she'd say she bumped into a door, or tripped on the stairs, or any of the dozen lies she perfected over the years. "Go clean up that glass," Cunnel ordered, releasing her and walking to the living room. "And when you're done, come to the bedroom. I don't care if you're tired." The last command made her stomach turn. This was another form of his control, demanding intimacy regardless of her exhaustion, pain, or tears. Refusing meant violence. Complying meant enduring while staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster until it was over. As Bisola knelt to pick up the broken glass, her hands shaking, she caught sight of her reflection in one of the larger shards. A stranger stared back at her, hollow-eyed, with a swelling lip and a fading bruise on her cheekbone from last week's lesson about forgetting to buy his favorite beer. "How did I get here?" She thought, not for the first time. When did I become this person? She remembered the early days of their relationship. Cunnel had been attentive, loving even. He courted her properly, brought her small gifts, made her laugh. The first time he'd raised his hand to her was 6 months after their wedding, a slap for disrespecting him in front of his friends by disagreeing about something trivial. She'd been shocked. He'd cried, apologized, sworn it would never happen again. She believed him. But it did happen again, and again, and again, until violence became their normal. As she dropped the glass shards into the dustbin, Bisola felt something inside her shift. Not hope exactly, that had died a long time ago, but something else. A small, defiant voice that whispered, "This cannot be all there is. This cannot be how my story ends." Later that night, after Cunnel had taken what he wanted and fallen asleep beside her, Bisola lay awake staring at those ceiling cracks. Her body ached. Her lip throbbed. Her wrist bore fresh bruises in the shape of his fingers. And for the first time in 4 years, instead of crying silently into her pillow, Bisola began a plan. She thought about her friend Amara, who worked as a secretary at a law firm. Amara had once mentioned that her boss handled family law cases. At the time, Bisola had changed the subject quickly. Talking about such things felt like betrayal, like admitting her marriage was failing. Now, she wondered, what would happen if she reached out? What if she told someone the truth? The thought terrified her. Cunnel had always warned her, if you ever try to leave me, I'll find you, and when I do, you'll wish you'd never been born. She believed him. She'd seen his capacity for violence. But lying here in the darkness, marked by his anger and hollow from his abuse, Bisola realized something crucial. She was already living a death. A slow, soul-crushing death of fear and pain. What if there was another way? As dawn broke over Lagos, painting their bedroom in shades of orange and pink, Bisola made a decision. She didn't know yet how she would do it. She didn't know if she'd have the courage to follow through, but she knew she had to try. Because 4 years of this had taught her one undeniable truth. Cunnel would never change. The violence would only escalate. And one day, one of these beatings would be her last. Tomorrow, she would reach out to Amara. Tomorrow, she would take the first small step toward reclaiming her life. Tonight, she would survive, just like she'd survived every other night. But tomorrow she would begin to fight back. Can you believe this is how some women live every single day? If you know someone in an abusive relationship, please speak up. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if you believe and know one deserves to be treated this way, hit that like button. Subscribe to AfricanTales by Zion for next chapter, where Bisola makes a choice that will change everything. Turn on notifications because you won't want to miss what happens next. Bisola's hands trembled as she held her phone in the pharmacy's storage room during her lunch break. She'd typed and deleted the message to Amara 5 times already. Each time, Cunnel's threats echoed in her mind. If you ever tell anyone our business, you'll regret it. But the bruises on her wrist were turning purple. The cut on her lip had reopened that morning when she tried to eat breakfast. And something fundamental had broken inside her last night. Something that couldn't be repaired with apologies or prayers. Finally, she pressed send. Amara, I need to talk to you. Privately. It's urgent. The response came within minutes. Bisola, of course. My lunch break is at 2 p.m. Meet me at the ShopRite food court in Acadia. 3 hours later, Bisola sat across from her friend in the busy food court, grateful for the noise and crowds that made their conversation private despite being in public. You look thin, Amara said gently, her eyes taking in Bisola's appearance with concern. Are you eating enough? Bisola almost laughed. Food was the least of her problems. Amara, you know your boss handles family law cases, right? Her friend's expression shifted from concern to understanding. Yes, Mrs. Okonkwo. She's one of the best divorce lawyers in Lagos. She reached across the table and took Bisola's hand. Talk to me. What's happening? The story spilled out in broken pieces. Not everything. Bisola couldn't bear to share the worst of it, but enough. The controlling behavior, the financial abuse, the escalating violence, the fear that had become her constant companion. Last night, he threw a glass at my head, Bisola whispered, pulling down the collar of her uniform to show the fading bruise on her collarbone. It's getting worse, Amara. I'm afraid of what might happen if I stay. Amara's eyes filled with tears. How long has this been going on? For years. Since 6 months after we married. For years? Bisola, why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I was ashamed. Because I kept thinking it would get better. Because he made me believe I deserved it. Bisola's voice broke. Because I didn't know how to leave. Amara, squeeze her hand tighter. You're telling me now. That's what matters. Listen, Mrs. Okonkwo can see you this week. But Bisola, you need to understand, once you start this process, there's no going back. Cunnel will know, and he might become more dangerous. He's already dangerous, Bisola said quietly. At least if I leave, I have a chance. That evening, Bisola returned home with a plan taking shape in her mind. She would meet with the lawyer. She would document the abuse. She would slowly, carefully, prepare her escape. But the moment she walked through the door, she knew something was wrong. Cunnel stood in their living room, her phone in his hand. Her old phone, the one she thought was safely hidden in her underwear drawer. "Who is Amara?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. "And why are you discussing our marriage with strangers?" Bisola's blood turned to ice. She'd been using her work phone to text Amara, but she'd forgotten about the old messages on her personal phone from months ago. Casual conversations that now, read through Cunnel's paranoid lens, must have seemed incriminating. "She's just a friend," Bisola said carefully. "We were talking about work. Don't lie to me." He threw the phone at her feet, where it clattered against a tile. "I read the messages. I'm worried about you. You deserve better. Please reach out if you need help. What have you been telling people about me?" "Nothing. Amara was just concerned because you've been playing the victim." Cunnel closed the distance between them in 3 strides. "Making me look like the bad guy while you run around gossiping about our private life." "I haven't told anyone anything," Bisola insisted, backing toward the door. "I swear." But Cunnel wasn't listening. His hand shot out, grabbing her by the throat and slamming her against the wall. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. "You think you can leave me?" he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You think you can run to your little friends and they'll protect you? I own you, Bisola. You're nothing without me. You have no money, no family, nowhere to go." He was right about most of it. Bisola's parents had died in a car accident 3 years ago. She had a younger brother in university, but he was barely surviving on his scholarship, and Cunnel controlled every naira she earned. "Can't breathe," Bisola gasped, clawing at his hand. He released her suddenly, and she collapsed to the floor, coughing and gasping. As she struggled to catch her breath, she felt him lean down close to her ear. "I'm watching you now," he whispered. "Every move you make, every person you talk to. If I even suspect you're planning to leave me, I will make you disappear. Do you understand?" Bisola nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Good." He straightened up and walked toward their bedroom. "Now, get up and make dinner. And don't burn it this time." After he left the room, Bisola remained on the floor for several minutes, her hand on her bruised throat. This was it, the moment she'd feared. He was suspicious now. He'd be watching her every move. But instead of the despair she expected to feel, Bisola felt something else crystallizing inside her. Determination. Because Cunnel had made a mistake. In his rage, in his need to assert dominance, he'd revealed something crucial. He was afraid of losing control over her, which meant he knew, on some level, that she had the power to leave. She just needed to be smarter about it. That night, while Cunnel snored beside her, Bisola made a new plan. She couldn't use her phones. He'd be monitoring them now. She couldn't confide in friends. He'd accuse her of gossiping. She couldn't save money. He controlled their accounts. But there were other ways. Tomorrow, she would stop at the pharmacy across the street from work. Not hers, where her boss might mention to Cunnel, but another one. She would buy a cheap burner phone with the small tips she sometimes received from grateful customers. Tips she'd been secretly saving in her locker. She would contact Amara from the burner phone and arrange to meet the lawyer without leaving a digital trail. She would start documenting everything, taking photos of bruises with a burner phone, writing down incidents with dates and times, keeping the evidence somewhere Cunnel would never think to look. And most importantly, she would continue to play the obedient wife. Let him think his threats had worked. Let him believe she was too broken to fight back. Because the greatest weapon Bisola had was the one thing Cunnel would never expect: patience. For years of abuse had taught her how to survive. Now she would learn how to escape. As the first light of dawn crept through their bedroom window, Bisola touched her bruised throat and made a silent promise to herself. "This is not how my story ends. I will get out. I will be free." She didn't know yet that her journey to freedom would require more courage than she'd ever imagined. She didn't know the price she'd have to pay for her safety. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Anything was better than spending one more year as Cunnel prisoner. The first step was always the hardest. Tomorrow, she would take it. Bisola is trapped, but she's not giving up. Would you have the courage to fight back? Drop a comment if you think she can escape. Like this video if you believe every woman deserves freedom from abuse. Subscribe to African Tales by Zion and turn on notifications, because next chapter is where things get really intense. You don't want to miss what happens when Cunnel discovers what she's planning. 2 weeks had passed since Cunnel's threat, and Bisola had become an actress in her own life. She smiled when he wanted. She was quiet when he demanded. She apologized for things that weren't her fault, all while secretly building her case against him. The burner phone stayed hidden inside a sanitary pad wrapper in her locker at work, a place Cunnel would never think to search even if he showed up at the pharmacy. She'd met with Mrs. Okonkwo twice now, during extended lunch breaks, that she covered by claiming the pharmacy was doing inventory. "You're doing the right thing," Mrs. Okonkwo had told her during their second meeting, reviewing the photos Bisola had taken of her injuries. "But I need you to understand, getting a restraining order and divorce will take time, and it will be dangerous. Men like your husband don't let go easily." Bisola knew the lawyer was right. Just last night, Cunnel had beaten her for taking too long at the market. The bruises on her ribs were so tender she could barely breathe deeply. But she'd photographed them that morning in the pharmacy bathroom, adding them to the growing collection of evidence. "I also need you to start thinking about where you'll go when you leave," Mrs. Okonkwo had continued. "Do you have any family? Friends who could take you in?" That was the problem. Bisola had carefully isolated her over the years, driving away her friends with his jealousy and controlling behavior. Her brother was in university in Ibadan, living in a small shared room. She had nowhere to go. "There are shelters," the lawyer had said gently, seeing by Bisola's expression. "Safe houses for women escaping domestic violence. I can help you get into one when the time comes." A shelter. The word felt heavy with shame and failure. But Bisola had pushed past those feelings. Survival mattered more than pride. Now, on this particular Thursday evening, Bisola was preparing dinner while Cunnel watched television in the living room. She'd learned to read his moods by the set of his shoulders, the tone of his voice. Tonight, he seemed relaxed, which usually meant a peaceful evening. She was wrong. "Bisola." Cunnel's voice cut through the apartment. "Come here." She wiped her hands on her apron and walked into the living room, her stomach already knotting with anxiety. "Yes." He was holding her work bag, the one she'd left by the door when she came home. "Why is your bag so heavy? What are you carrying around?" "Just work things. My uniform, my lotion, female products." "Show me." Bisola's heart stopped. The burner phone was in her locker at work, but she'd made the mistake of bringing home printed copies of the divorce papers Mrs. Okonkwo had prepared. They were folded inside a pharmacy pamphlet about women's health, something she thought looked innocent enough. "Why do you need to see inside my bag?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Because I want to. Because you've been acting strange lately. Because I don't trust you." He appended the bag on the couch, contents spilling everywhere. "What are you hiding?" Bisola watched in horror as he pawed through her things, her wallet, her keys, her pharmacy badge, various papers and pamphlets. His hand closed around the women's health pamphlet, and she stopped breathing. "What's this?" He started to unfold it. "It's just information about women's health issues," Bisola said quickly, "for customers at the pharmacy." But as he opened it, the legal papers fell out. Cunnel stared at them for a long moment, his face going completely still. When he looked up at her, Bisola saw something in his eyes that terrified her more than his rage. Cold, calculated fury. "Divorce papers," he said quietly. "You went to a lawyer. You got divorce papers." "Cunnel, let me explain. You were planning to leave me." He stood slowly, crumpling the papers in his fist. "After everything I've done for you, after I married you when no one else wanted you, after I gave you a home, a life, everything you have, you were going to divorce me. You've been hurting me." The words burst out before Bisola could stop them. For 4 years, You've been beating me, controlling me, treating me like I'm your property instead of your wife. I can't live like this anymore." The slap came so fast, she didn't see it coming. One moment she was standing, the next she was on the floor, her cheek burning, her ear ringing. "You ungrateful bitch," Cunnel said, his voice shaking with rage. "I should have known you'd try something like this. You're just like all women, always looking for a way out, always ready to betray the man who takes care of you." He grabbed her by the hair, dragging her across the living room floor. Bisola screamed, clawing at his hands, but his grip was iron. "You want to leave me?" he shouted. "Fine. Let me show you what happens to wives who try to leave." What happened next would later become a blur in Bisola's memory. She remembered being thrown against furniture. She remembered the taste of blood. She remembered begging, screaming, trying to protect her head with her arms. She remembered Mama Ngozi pounding on the door, shouting, "I'm calling the police. Leave that girl alone." And she remembered Cunnel's final words before he stormed out of the apartment. "You're dead to me. When I come back, you better be gone, or you'll wish you were." Bisola lay on the floor of their living room, every part of her body screaming in pain. Her lip was split. Her ribs felt cracked. Blood dripped from her nose onto the tile floor she'd mopped that morning. But worse than the physical pain was the realization. He knew she was trying to leave. And now, he was more dangerous than ever. The door burst open, and Mama Ngozi rushed in, gasping at the sight. "Oh, my daughter! Jesus Christ! Look at you!" She knelt beside Bisola, her old hands gentle as she assessed the damage. "We must get you to a hospital, and we must call the police." "No police!" Bisola managed to whisper through her swollen lips. "He'll kill me if I report him. He'll kill you if you don't." Mama Ngozi pulled out her phone. "Enough is enough. I've been listening to him beat you for too long. I've watched you waste away in this marriage. No more." Before Bisola could protest, the old woman was dialing. "Yes, police? I need to report a domestic violence case. My neighbor's husband just beat her nearly to death." As Bisola drifted in and out of consciousness on her living room floor, she heard sirens in the distance. Help was coming. But so was Cunnel, eventually, and when he returned, she knew with terrifying certainty that his rage would be unstoppable. She'd crossed a line by trying to leave. She'd challenged his control. And men like Cunnel didn't forgive that kind of rebellion. What Bisola didn't know yet was that this brutal beating would be the catalyst that finally set her free. That Mama Ngozi's call would set in motion a series of events that would change everything. And that sometimes, when you think you've reached the darkest point, dawn is just about to break. This is so heartbreaking. Mama Ngozi finally did what we've all been screaming for. Drop a comment if you think Bisola will survive this. Smash that like button if you believe in speaking up when you see abuse. Subscribe to AfricanTales by Zion for next chapter where everything changes. Will the police arrive in time? What will happen when Cunnel comes back? Hit that notification bell now. The hospital room was stark white and smelled of antiseptic. Bisola lay in the bed, her body a map of Cunnel's rage, broken ribs wrapped tightly, stitches above her eyebrow, bruises covering her arms and torso in various shades of purple and yellow. But she was alive. 2 police officers stood by her bedside, a woman named Officer Chidinma and her partner, Officer Taiwo. They'd been patient, giving Bisola time to recover enough to speak, but now they needed her statement. "Mrs. Adissa," Officer Chidinma said gently, "we need you to tell us what happened. We know this is difficult, but your neighbor has already given her statement. We photographed your injuries. Now we need to hear from you." Bisola's hands trembled as she gripped the thin hospital blanket. Every part of her wanted to protect Cunnel, to make excuses, to say it wasn't as bad as it looked. For years of conditioning didn't disappear overnight. But then she remembered his hands around her throat, his fists in her hair, his promise that she was dead to him. "He beat me," she whispered. "My husband beat me because he found divorce papers in my bag." This wasn't the first time, was it? Officer Chidinma's voice was kind but firm. "No, he's been hitting me for 4 years. Since 6 months after we got married." As she spoke, the story spilled out, all of it: the controlling behavior, the financial abuse, the escalating violence, the sexual assault that she never had words for until Mrs. Okonkwo explained what marital rape meant. Every degradation, every threat, every time she'd hidden bruises and lied to protect him. Officer Taiwo took notes while Officer Chidinma sat beside her bed, occasionally squeezing her hand when the words became too difficult. "Where's your husband now?" Officer Taiwo asked. "I don't know. He left after—" Bisola couldn't finish the sentence. "We have officers watching your apartment in case he returns." "But Mrs. Adissa, you need to understand. When you're discharged from this hospital, you cannot go back to that apartment. Not until we've arrested him, and you have a restraining order in place." "I don't have anywhere else to go," Bisola said, tears streaming down her bruised face. "He controls all our money. Everything I own is in that apartment. There's a women's shelter in Acadia," Officer Chidinma said. "It's safe, secure, and they specialize in helping women escape domestic violence. We can take you there when you're discharged." A shelter. The word still carried shame, but Bisola was beginning to understand that the real shame belonged to Cunnel, not to her. "What will happen to him?" she asked quietly. "When you find him, he'll be arrested and charged with assault. Given the severity of your injuries and the documented history of abuse, he'll likely be denied bail. Mrs. Adissa, your husband is looking at serious prison time." Prison. The thought should have brought Bisola satisfaction, but mostly she felt numb. This was the man she'd loved once, the man she'd promised to spend her life with. How had it come to this? 3 days later, Bisola was discharged from the hospital into the care of Sister Margaret, who ran the women's shelter. The shelter was a nondescript building in a quiet part of Acadia, its location kept secret to protect the women inside. Inside, Bisola met other survivors, women who'd escaped situations similar to hers. Some had children with them. All carried the same haunted look in their eyes, the same flinching when doors closed too loudly, the same habit of walking with their shoulders hunched. "You're safe here," Sister Margaret told her, showing her to a small room with a single bed, a dresser, and a window with bars. "No one gets in without authorization. We have security, counselors, legal aid, everything you need to rebuild your life." That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar place, Bisola should have felt lost. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 4 years: peace. For the first time since her wedding day, she went to sleep without fear of being woken by violence, without wondering what mood Cunnel would be in, without calculating whether she'd said or done something that would trigger his rage. She was free. The next morning, Mrs. Okonkwo visited the shelter with news. "The police found Cunnel at his shop yesterday. He's been arrested and charged with aggravated assault, battery, and unlawful detention. He locked you in the apartment on multiple occasions, which counts as false imprisonment." "What does that mean?" Bisola asked. "It means he's facing up to 7 years in prison if convicted. And given your injuries, the photographic evidence, the neighbor's testimony, and your medical records, conviction is very likely." 7 years, Bisola repeated, trying to process it. "There's more. I've filed for an emergency divorce on grounds of cruelty and abuse. Given that he's now in police custody and facing criminal charges, the court should fast-track the proceedings. You could be legally divorced within 6 months. 6 months. Half a year from now, she would no longer be Cunnel Adissa's wife. She would be simply Bisola again, whoever that woman was without the weight of abuse defining her. What about money?" Bisola asked. "He controlled everything. I don't even know what we have." "That's where it gets interesting," Mrs. Okonkwo said with a slight smile. "I've had an investigator looking into your husband's finances. Did you know he owns the auto shop outright? It's worth quite a bit. And there's a savings account with nearly 2 million naira that he never told you about." Bisola stared at her lawyer in shock. 2 million naira? But he always said we were barely getting by. That's why I couldn't have my own money. Classic financial abuse. He made you feel dependent while secretly hoarding assets. But here's the good news. In the divorce, you're entitled to half of all marital property. That includes the shop and the savings account. For the first time in days, Bisola felt something close to hope. 1 million naira. Enough to start over. Enough to be truly free. Over the next 2 weeks, Bisola slowly began to rebuild. She attended counseling sessions at the shelter, learning to recognize the patterns of abuse she'd endured. She joined group therapy with other survivors, finding strength in shared experiences. She started sleeping through the night, without nightmares. And she began to remember who she was before Cunnel had systematically broken her down. She was intelligent. She was capable. She was a skilled pharmacy technician who was good at her job. She had dreams once of maybe opening her own pharmacy someday, of traveling, of living without fear. Those dreams felt possible again. On the day of Cunnel's bail hearing, Bisola attended court with Mrs. Okonkwo. She hadn't seen him since the night of the beating, and she'd been terrified of how she'd react. When they led him in wearing handcuffs, Bisola was shocked by what she saw. The man who had loomed so large in her life, who had controlled her every movement through fear and violence, looked small, diminished. His arrogance was gone, replaced by the defeated posture of a man who'd finally faced consequences. Their eyes met across the courtroom. She expected to see rage or threats, or that cold calculation she'd learned to fear. Instead, she saw a stranger who had no power over her anymore. The judge denied bail, citing the severity of the assault and the risk of witness intimidation. Cunnel would remain in custody until his trial. As they led him away, Bisola felt something release in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. He was gone, truly, finally gone, and she was still here. She had survived. Bisola is free, but her journey isn't over. Do you think 7 years is enough punishment? Comment your thoughts. Like if you're proud of Bisola's strength. Subscribe to African Tales by Zion for the final chapter, where we see what happens next. Will Bisola truly be able to rebuild her life? Turn on notifications for next chapter, the conclusion. 6 months had passed since that night in the hospital. 6 months that felt like both a lifetime and a moment. Bisola stood in front of the mirror in her small but tidy one-bedroom apartment in Agba, Lagos. It wasn't much, just a single room, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom, but it was hers, paid for with her own money, secured with her own name on the lease. No one could take it from her. She looked different now, healthier. The haunted look had faded from her eyes, replaced by something steadier. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost during those final terrible months with Cunnel. Her hair, which she'd always kept short because Cunnel preferred it that way, now fell past her shoulders in natural braids that she'd chosen herself. Today was significant for 2 reasons. First, it was the day her divorce became final. After 6 months of legal proceedings, she was no longer Bisola Adissa. She reclaimed her maiden name, Bisola Oladipo, and with it her identity. Second, it was the day of Cunnel's sentencing. Mrs. Okonkwo had called that morning with the news. 5 years. The judge gave him 5 years for aggravated assault and domestic violence. With good behavior, he might serve 3, but he's going to prison. Bisola, you're safe. 5 years. Less than the 7 he'd faced, but more than enough time for Bisola to build a life he couldn't touch. She'd chosen not to attend the sentencing. She didn't need to see him anymore. That chapter of her life was closed. Instead, she was preparing for something better, a job interview at a new pharmacy in Ikeja, one with better pay and room for advancement. The owner had been impressed by her experience and recommendations. If she got this job, she'd be able to save money faster, work toward her dream of one day opening her own pharmacy. As she adjusted her outfit, a professional blue dress she'd bought herself for herself, her phone rang. It was Amara. "How are you feeling today?" her friend asked. "Surprisingly good," Bisola admitted. "Nervous about the interview, but good." "You're going to do great. And Bisola, I'm so proud of you. What you did, leaving, fighting back, surviving, that took incredible courage." After they hung up, Bisola gathered her things and headed out. As she locked her apartment door, with her key, she paused, remembering the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Broken, terrified, convinced she had no options. That woman felt like a stranger now. The job interview went better than Bisola had dared hope. Mr. Adeyemi, the pharmacy owner, was impressed not just by her credentials, but by her passion for patient care and her ideas for improving pharmacy services. "When can you start?" he asked at the end of the interview. "Whenever you need me," Bisola replied, hardly believing it was happening. "How about next Monday? We'll start you at 70,000 naira monthly, with a review in 3 months. 70,000 naira, more than she'd ever made before. Money that would be hers, in an account only she could access. That evening, Bisola returned to the women's shelter where she'd stayed during her recovery. She wasn't living there anymore, but she volunteered now, helping other women navigate the same journey she completed. Today, she was meeting with a new resident, a young woman named Blessing who'd arrived the day before, her face bearing the same marks of violence Bisola remembered from her own mirror. "Does it get better?" Blessing asked, her voice small and scared. "Will I ever feel normal again?" Bisola took her hand gently. "It gets better. It gets so much better. Right now, you can't see past the pain and fear. But I promise you, there's a whole life waiting for you on the other side of this. A life where you're not afraid, where you make your own choices, where you remember who you are." "I don't even know who I am anymore," Blessing whispered. "He took everything." "No," Bisola said firmly. "He took a lot, but he didn't take everything. Your strength is still there. That's how you made it to the shelter. Your courage is still there. That's how you're still alive. And your future is still there, waiting for you to claim it." As she spoke, Bisola realized she was also talking to her past self, to the woman who'd lain on a hospital bed 6 months ago, broken and despairing. If she could go back and tell that woman anything, it would be this: "You will survive. You will heal. You will be happy again. The man who hurt you will face justice, and you will be free." Later that night, alone in her apartment, Bisola opened her laptop and did something she'd been thinking about for weeks. She created a blog. It was simple, just text on a plain background, but the words she typed were powerful. "My name is Bisola Oladipo. For 4 years, I survived domestic violence. I'm writing this blog to tell other women who are going through what I went through. You are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. What is happening to you is real. It's abuse, and it's not your fault. Leaving is hard. It might be the hardest thing you ever do, but I'm here to tell you it's possible. I left with nothing but the clothes on my back and the courage to ask for help. 6 months later, I have my own apartment, a new job, and something I didn't have before: peace. If you're reading this and you're scared, please reach out. There are people who will help you, shelters that will protect you, lawyers who will fight for you, and a future waiting for you that's so much better than what you're living right now. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to be free. And if I can do it, so can you." She published a post, not knowing if anyone would read it. But that didn't matter. She'd told her truth. She'd added her voice to the chorus of survivors saying, "This happened to me and I survived." 3 months later, Bisola's blog had hundreds of followers. Women reached out to her daily, asking for advice, sharing their own stories, thanking her for giving them hope. Mr. Adeyemi had promoted her to assistant pharmacy manager, impressed by her work ethic and leadership. Her brother had graduated from university and was living with her temporarily while he looked for work. The first time in years she'd had family close by. And Mama Ngozi, the neighbor who'd saved her life by calling the police, had become like a grandmother to her. They had tea together every Sunday, and the old woman never failed to remind Bisola, "You saved yourself, my daughter. I just made a phone call. The strength was always yours." One Saturday afternoon, Bisola received a message on her blog from a woman named Chioma. "I've been reading your posts for weeks. Today, I finally found the courage to pack a bag and call the police. I'm at a shelter now. I'm scared, but I'm safe. Thank you for showing me it was possible." Bisola read the message 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was why she'd survived. Not just for herself, but to be a light for others still trapped in the darkness. She thought about Cunnel sometimes, wondered if he was learning anything in prison, wondered if he understood what he'd done. Mostly, she felt nothing, just a vague sadness for the man who'd chosen violence over love, control over partnership. But she didn't waste much time on those thoughts. She was too busy building her future. On the anniversary of her freedom, exactly 1 year after that terrible night, Bisola did something significant. She enrolled in part-time business classes at a local university. Her dream of owning her own pharmacy was no longer a fantasy. It was a goal with concrete steps and a timeline. As she walked into her first class, notebook in hand and determination in her heart, Bisola realized something profound. She'd spent 4 years believing she was worthless, broken, deserving of punishment. Now she knew the truth. She was strong. She was resilient. She was worthy of love, including her own. The girl who cowered on a kitchen floor, picking up broken glass, was gone. In her place was a woman who'd walked through fire and emerged transformed. Bisola Oladipo was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, an advocate, a woman reclaiming her life one day at a time. And she was just getting started. The end. What a journey. From victim to survivor to advocate. If Bisola's story touched your heart, comment, "I stand with survivors," below. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Hit that like button if you believe every woman deserves freedom and safety. And subscribe to AfricanTales by Zion for more powerful stories that matter. Remember, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be free. Thank you for watching, and never forget, abuse is never love. Stay strong, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next story.